Teresa Fusco. On the night of November 10, 1984, 16-year-old Teresa Fusco finished her shift at the Hot Skates roller rink in Lynbrook, New York. She was a high school student, known to friends as Terry, and she worked part-time at the snack bar inside the rink. Reports place her leaving just before 10 o'clock that evening. She never made it home. Her disappearance would become the beginning of one of Nassau County's most tragic and long-running mysteries. In the weeks that followed, local police, family, and volunteers searched the area. Then, in early December, the search ended in heartbreak. Teresa's body was found in a wooded patch near the roller rink, covered in leaves and debris. An autopsy later determined that she had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled. Investigators gathered biological evidence from the scene, including semen, which would later prove central to the case. At first, detectives focused on men who lived in the area or who had a connection to the rink. In 1986, 3 men, John Restivo, Dennis Halstead, and John Kogut, were convicted for Teresa's murder. Each had ties to the community, but none matched the DNA profile from the crime scene. Over time, legal questions mounted about their guilt. In 2003, DNA testing conclusively proved that the biological material collected from Teresa's body did not belong to any of the 3 men. As a result, all were exonerated and released from prison. Years later, 2 of the men were awarded $18 million each for wrongful incarceration. The case grew cold. Decades passed. But Teresa's family and the local community never forgot. Investigators preserved the original evidence, holding on to hope that future technology could bring answers. In 2024, a breakthrough came. Detectives began tracking a man named Richard Bilodeau. In 1984, Bilodeau had been 23 or 24, living with his grandparents just blocks from the rink. At the time of the renewed investigation, he was 63, living in Center Moriches, Suffolk County, and working overnight shifts at a Walmart. In February 2024, detectives recovered a discarded cup and straw from a smoothie cafe in Suffolk County, believed to have been used by Bilodeau. DNA was extracted and compared to the sample collected from Teresa's body in 1984. The match was definitive. Nassau County prosecutors state that the DNA from the straw identified Bilodeau as the source of the semen at the crime scene. On October 15, 2025, Richard Bilodeau was indicted in Nassau County on 2 counts of murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 1 for murder in the course of rape. He pleaded not guilty at his arraignment and is currently awaiting trial. His next scheduled court appearance is set for November 21, 2025. If convicted, he faces a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Bilodeau's connection to Teresa is unclear. Neighbors and friends of the Fusco family do not recall him as someone known to Teresa or as a local acquaintance. When questioned after the DNA match, Bilodeau reportedly remarked, "People got away with murder back then." His defense is expected to challenge the chain of custody for biological evidence preserved over 40 years, as well as the legality of collecting DNA from discarded items in public. Teresa's story is complicated by the failings of the original investigation. Years after the first convictions, a federal jury found that the lead detective had fabricated hair evidence and suppressed information favorable to the defense. This misconduct, documented in civil litigation, likely delayed the identification of the real perpetrator. The case is also linked to a cluster of disappearances in the Lynbrook area during the 1980s, though no forensic link to other cases has ever been confirmed. Teresa's family has waited more than 40 years for answers and for justice. Her mother once said in a public statement, Terry was a wonderful daughter. She was robbed of her future. At the time of this script, the case is ongoing, and the outcome will depend on the court's assessment of the DNA evidence and the arguments presented at trial. The case of Teresa Fusco remains a reminder of how forensic science, persistence, and community memory can revive even the coldest of cases. Mary Marlovitz. On April 25, 1972, skeletal remains were found near Summer Haven, Arizona, high on Mount Lemmon, northeast of Tucson. The discovery was made by a local resident, but little else is known about the exact circumstances. The remains were incomplete, lacking the head and hands. Clothing and personal effects were scattered at the site. A pair of blue denim pants, a white moccasin-style shoe, an Avon Pagoda lipstick tube, a few matchbook covers, transit ticket stubs, and coins, minted up to the year 1959. From the first moment, the case presented more questions than answers. At the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office, the unknown woman was cataloged as Jane Doe, with the internal designation 000751. Forensic analysis at the time suggested the remains had been there for years, perhaps as many as 10 to 13. Some reports estimate the death occurred between 1959 and 1965, but the exact window has never been confirmed. The cause and manner of death remain undetermined in the public record. The passage of time, exposure, and animal activity had left only bones and fragments, limiting what could be learned. For decades, Jane Doe's identity was a mystery. Law enforcement files went cold, and her case became one of many unsolved, unidentified remains in Arizona. Attempts to match the remains to missing persons from the region and around the country turned up no leads. Dental and fingerprint comparisons were impossible. Her head and hands were never found. Public records do not detail any occupation, personal history, or family context for the unknown woman, and she became a symbol of the forgotten and the lost. As the years went on, Jane Doe, 1972, remained in the archives. In the 2020s, cold case nonprofit organizations and forensic genealogists began reviewing unsolved cases of unidentified remains across the United States, including those held by Pima County. DNA extraction from degraded bone samples was now possible with advanced technology. In this case, forensic teams managed to recover enough genetic material to build a profile, even after more than 50 years in storage. Genealogists used this DNA to search public databases, looking for distant relatives. The investigation eventually traced connections to families in Pennsylvania. After building a family tree and confirming relationships through living relatives, investigators were able to restore Jane Doe's name. In 2025, the identity of the woman found on Mount Lemmon was made public. Mary R. Marlovitz, originally from Pennsylvania. Details about Mary's life before her death remain sparse in the public record. News reports confirm she was a Pennsylvania woman, but do not clarify her age at death. Some sources suggest she was in her mid-20s, while others estimate she could have been as old as 38. There are no published accounts of when she left Pennsylvania, what brought her to Arizona, or how she may have lived in the intervening years. Public records do not indicate an occupation or further details about her background. The circumstances of Mary Marlovitz's death remain unresolved. There are no publicly named suspects or perpetrators, and there is no official confirmation of foul play. The loss of the head and hands made it impossible to establish a facial profile or compare fingerprints. The artifacts at the scene, transit tickets, coins, and personal effects suggest she may have traveled in the late 1950s or early 1960s. Whether she died near the site where she was found or was moved there later remains an open question. The announcement of Mary Marlowitz's identification in 2025 was made through cooperation between the Pima County Medical Examiner, genealogists, and media in Pennsylvania. Her story is one of many recent cold cases where advanced DNA technology has given names back to the nameless. The file number 000751 has been retired, and Mary's family has been notified. Today, the case remains officially unsolved. Mary Marlowitz's story is a reminder of both the limits and possibilities of forensic science. Her identity was restored through decades of careful preservation, family persistence, and modern genetic research. The final truth of how and why she died on a mountain in Arizona may never be known. But after 50 years, one answer has been found: her name, Melanie White. On the evening of August 26, 1994, Melanie White disappeared from Las Vegas. Melanie was 27, a mother who had recently moved to the valley that spring. She was reported missing that night. The following morning, August 27th, two hikers exploring near Gypsum Wash in the Lake Mead National Recreation Area discovered her body. The site lies off North Shore Road, a remote desert wash surrounded by rugged terrain. The hikers notified authorities, and officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department responded to the scene. Investigators identified Melanie as the victim soon after and determined that she had been strangled. The spot where she was found was isolated, with little around but rock, scrub, and empty desert. At the time, detectives could not identify a suspect, and there were no immediate leads. The case quickly grew cold. Melanie's family and the Las Vegas community were left with questions and heartbreak. In the years that followed, Melanie's murder remained unsolved. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department kept her case file open, but despite periodic reviews, there were no breakthroughs. The biological evidence collected in 1994, details of which were not made public, remained preserved in the department's evidence room. Melanie's story faded from headlines, but her case was not forgotten by cold case detectives. A turning point came in 2021. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department submitted preserved DNA from the case to a forensic laboratory, Othram, for advanced genetic analysis. This partnership, supported by community advocacy groups such as the Vegas Justice League, enabled the use of forensic genetic genealogy. This approach allows investigators to compare unknown DNA to public databases, building family trees to identify possible suspects or relatives. On August 26, 2024, Othram notified detectives that the genetic profile from the crime scene pointed to a single individual, Arthur Joseph Lavery. Lavery was born in 1955 and grew up in the Las Vegas area. In 1994, he would have been 38. Further investigation included targeted DNA testing with Lavery's relatives, which confirmed the match. Authorities learned that Lavery had died in 2021 with the exact month disputed in the press. Some sources say February, others May. Both agree that the cause was complications related to COVID-19. Because Lavery was deceased, no prosecution or formal charges could be filed. On October 22, 2024, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department announced to the public that Melanie White's murder had been solved in the investigative sense. Lieutenant Jason Johansson briefed the media, explaining that forensic genetic genealogy and confirmatory kinship testing had identified Lavery as the suspect. The department clarified that Due to Lavery's death, many questions would remain unanswered, including how he encountered Melanie, whether he knew her, or what motivated the crime. No evidence has been made public to suggest a prior relationship between the victim and the suspect. Melanie's murder is one of a growing number of cold cases closed through advanced DNA technology. The combination of preserved evidence, community support, and forensic innovation was essential to this outcome. The case also reflects a new model in law enforcement, where partnerships with philanthropic organizations, such as the Vegas Justice League, help fund expensive DNA testing and analysis. There have been no publicly reported chain of custody issues or procedural irregularities in the handling of Melanie's case. The biological evidence, carefully stored for 30 years, proved critical in the eventual identification of her killer. No alternative suspects have been presented in the press, and there is no evidence of any prior leads before the genetic breakthrough. Melanie's name is sometimes spelled Melanie in press reports, but official Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department releases use Melanie. The same goes for the precise locale of the discovery. While many headlines refer simply to Lake Mead, the actual site was near Gypsum Wash, within the Lake Mead National Recreation Area. For Melanie's family, and for the detectives who worked her case for decades, the identification of Arthur Lavery offers some measure of closure. Yet the story leaves unanswered questions about motive, opportunity, and the hidden connections that can lead to tragedy. Melanie White's case stands as an example of what persistence and science can achieve, even when justice itself comes too late. Esther Gonzalez. On the evening of February 9, 1979, 17-year-old Esther Gonzalez left her parents' home in Beaumont, California, intending to walk to her sister's house in Banning. The route was familiar, a stretch of road through the Riverside County foothills. Esther never arrived. By the next morning, February 10th, her family's fears were realized when a call came in to the sheriff's Banning station. An anonymous male reported finding a body off State Route 243, just south of Poppet Flats Road, near a snowbank. Deputies responded to the scene, where they found Esther's body partially buried in the snow. She had been raped and bludgeoned, her body left in a cold and remote area. Investigators immediately began searching for clues, collecting physical evidence from the scene. Biological samples, including semen, were preserved for analysis. The site, located off a mountain highway between Banning and Idlewild, was isolated, making the investigation challenging from the start. A key moment in the early investigation occurred when deputies identified the man who had reported the body. His name was Louis Randolph "Randy" Williamson. Williamson, then a United States Marine Corps veteran living in Riverside County, agreed to an interview and subsequently passed a polygraph test. Based on this result, investigators informally cleared him as a suspect. For years, no further evidence linked Williamson to the crime. The focus of the investigation shifted, and the case went cold. As decades passed, the case file remained open, but no new leads surfaced. The semen sample collected from Esther's body was eventually developed into a DNA profile and entered into the National CODIS database. There were no matches. Esther's family and the community of Beaumont waited for answers that did not come. In 2023, the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Homicide Team reopened the investigation. The team included the District Attorney's Office, the Sheriff Coroner, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Riverside Police Department. They sent the preserved DNA evidence to Othram, a forensic laboratory specializing in advanced DNA sequencing and forensic genetic genealogy. Using investigative genealogy, Othram created a genealogical profile and built family trees to narrow down possible suspects. During this process, investigators discovered that Lewis Randy Williamson had died in Broward County, Florida, in 2014. Critically, an autopsy blood sample from Williamson had been retained by the Broward County Sheriff's Office. With the assistance of the California Department of Justice, investigators compared this autopsy blood directly to the DNA profile developed from the semen recovered in 1979. The match was conclusive. On November 20th, 2024, the Riverside County District Attorney's Office formally announced that Lewis Randolph Williamson had been identified as the person who raped and killed Esther Gonzalez. Williamson was never prosecuted. He died before being linked to the crime. The case is considered exceptionally cleared by identification, meaning that while no trial will occur, the investigative process has reached a factual resolution. The identification of Williamson closes one chapter, but leaves other questions unanswered. There is no public record of a relationship between Williamson and Esther, and no evidence suggests they knew each other before the attack. Williamson's decision to report the discovery of Esther's body and his argumentative demeanor with deputies stood out, but his polygraph pass in 1979 diverted suspicion for decades. The use of polygraph alone, without DNA clearance, is now seen as a cautionary lesson for investigators. There have been no reported issues with evidence handling or chain of custody in the case. The semen sample was preserved and transferred according to protocol, and the autopsy blood was securely handled between Broward County and California authorities. Modern forensic techniques were critical to the outcome. The cold case team's efforts, aided by technological advances and interagency cooperation, ultimately brought resolution to Esther's family. Esther Gonzalez was a high school senior, remembered by her family as loving and full of promise. More than 45 years after her death, advances in forensic science provided long-awaited answers. The Riverside County Regional Cold Case Homicide Team continues to review other unsolved cases and encourages anyone with information about possible additional crimes involving Williamson to come forward. For Esther's loved ones, her name and story remain a lasting reminder of the importance of persistence, collaboration, and truth in the search for justice. If you've made it this far into the story, consider subscribing. Your support helps keep these names in the light. Garnet Elizabeth Griffith. On the morning of January 11th, 1989, Garnet Elizabeth Griffith, a 36-year-old librarian, was at her home on Kensington Way in Annapolis, Maryland. A little after 10 o'clock that morning, a man entered her house. According to the Annapolis Police Department, the intruder shot Garnet at close range. She was also beaten. The precise moment of the attack was described by Chief Edward Jackson in a 2025 press statement. The following day, January 12th, a 911 call brought officers to the house. They found Garnet deceased. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner determined the cause of death was a gunshot wound. Neighbors and colleagues at the library were stunned. Garnet was remembered as dedicated to her work and well-liked in the community. Her murder sent shockwaves through Annapolis. For decades, no one was charged. The case went cold. Investigators kept reviewing the file over the years. The Annapolis Police Department continued to revisit the evidence, hoping that advances in forensic science would eventually provide answers. DNA evidence was preserved from the crime scene, but for many years, the technology was not sufficient to produce a suspect. Garnet's family and friends waited, with little information on who could have committed such a violent act. In 2025, After more than 35 years, the cold case team at the Annapolis Police Department made a breakthrough. Detectives, led by Chief Edward Jackson, Deputy Chief Stan Brandford, Detective Corporal Will Noel, and Sergeant Castor Redondo, re-examined legacy evidence from the 1989 homicide. With help from modern DNA analysis, a match was finally made. The DNA led them to William Eugene Cook Jr., a longtime Annapolis resident. On October 8, 2025, police obtained an arrest warrant. The next day, at 12:25 p.m., detectives arrested Cook at 29 West Washington Street in Annapolis. He was 68 years old at the time, according to CBS Baltimore. Some other outlets listed a different age, but 68 is the figure most widely reported. Cook was charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, first- and second-degree rape, and assault with intent to murder. He was held without bond, and a preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 5, 2025. Little is known about Cook's activities in the days leading up to the crime. The Annapolis Police Department has not publicly detailed a pre-crime chronology. According to CBS, citing the Baltimore Banner, Cook had mowed Garnett's lawn as a teenager, and he was questioned multiple times by police over the years. Cook denied involvement every time. There is no confirmation from police about any adult relationship or motive between Cook and Garnett. The only direct link is the DNA match, the evidence that changed the course of the Chone investigation. Was DNA preserved from the original crime scene? The police and media have not specified exactly which items yielded the DNA, whether it was a swab, clothing, or another source. What is clear is that the DNA comparison was enough to identify Cook as the suspect. The police emphasized that there were no chain of custody problems. The DNA was handled with care, and the cold case team worked closely with partner agencies and the state's attorney's office to make the arrest possible. The breakthrough came through a methodical review and the application of new technology, not a sudden confession or new witness. The Annapolis Police Department credits advances in forensic science and the persistence of the cold case team for finally bringing charges in the case. There have been no public allegations of procedural misconduct, and no alternative suspect theory has emerged since the DNA match. For Garnett's family, colleagues, and the community, the arrest of William Cook Jr. represents a long-awaited step toward justice. The case stands as a reminder that even decades-old crimes can be solved when evidence is preserved and investigators remain committed. As of the most recent reports, Cook remains in custody, awaiting further court proceedings. The story of Garnett Griffith is a testament to the enduring importance of truth and the ongoing impact of forensic science. K. Josephine Medden. On August 3, 1987, K. Josephine Medden, a 48-year-old elementary school teacher in Hyam Palm, California, was reported missing by her husband, Nicholas Medden. He told the Trinity County Sheriff's Office that Kay's purse, car, and personal effects were left at their home. There was no sign of forced entry or evidence that she had planned to leave. According to her doctor, she had been in good spirits and had no serious health issues. Kay's sudden disappearance was immediately considered suspicious. Months later, on November 25, 1987, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office received a package in the mail. Inside were skeletal remains, accompanied by an anonymous letter. The writer provided directions to additional remains near Ammon Ridge Road, in eastern Humboldt County. Deputies followed the instructions and discovered more human remains at the location. Using dental records, the authorities identified the remains as belonging to K. Josephine Medden. In 1988, a death certificate was issued. Yet because not all of Kay's body had been recovered, she remained listed as a missing person, a rare administrative situation for law enforcement. The case grew colder as years passed. On February 16, 1993, a partial human skull was found on the beach near Trinidad Head, along the Humboldt County coastline. The skull was first processed by the Fortuna Police Department, then transferred to the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office. DNA was extracted from the skull and entered into state and national unidentified person databases, but there was no match. For decades, the skull's identity remained a mystery. By the early 2020s, cold case detectives and forensic scientists had new tools at their disposal. In 2024, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office secured federal community project funding, thanks to Representative Jared Huffman. This allowed investigators to work through a backlog of unidentified remains cases, including Kay's. Advanced genome sequencing was performed by Othram, a private forensic laboratory specializing in investigative genetic genealogy. In September 2024, Othram reported that the skull found in 1993 might belong to Kay Medden, based on genealogical matches to living relatives, including a possible daughter. To confirm the finding, investigators obtained a DNA sample from Kay's daughter. The California Department of Justice Laboratory compared the daughter's DNA to the genetic profile from the skull. In 2025, the match was officially confirmed. The public announcement came in May, bringing long-awaited answers to Kay's family and closing a circle that had remained open for nearly 40 years. Despite the recovery of her remains at two separate locations, Ammon Ridge in the interior mountains and Trinidad Head on the coast, no one has been publicly named as a suspect in Kay's death. Her husband, Nicholas Medden, reported her missing and passed away in August 2018. Law enforcement has not suggested his involvement or named any other individual as a suspect. The exact mechanism of Kay's death remains undetermined. The condition and dispersal of her remains make it difficult to reconstruct what happened in her final hours. The case remains an open homicide investigation. The anonymous letter that arrived in 1987, along with the mailed skeletal remains, remains one of the most unusual aspects of the case. While some commentary claims the package was mailed from San Francisco, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office has not officially confirmed the origin. The long separation between the two recovery sites, from Ammon Ridge to Trinidad Head, a distance of 45 to 100 miles, adds to the mystery. Authorities have not explained how or when Kay's remains came to be so widely dispersed. The investigation involved multiple agencies over the decades, including the Trinity County Sheriff's Office, Fortuna Police Department, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, and the California Department of Justice. The persistent preservation and careful transfer of evidence enabled new forensic techniques to succeed where older methods failed. There have been no reported issues with evidence handling or procedural irregularities. Kay Josephine Medden's case demonstrates the enduring impact of scientific advances and the critical importance of collaboration between local and state authorities. Although her murder remains unsolved, the identification of her remains is a vital step in seeking justice. Investigators continue to treat the case as a homicide and encourage anyone with information to come forward. For Kay's family, her story is a testament to perseverance and the power of truth to bring light, even after decades of silence. Jesse Lee Williamson. On August 1, 1978, a maintenance worker at Pool Knobs Recreation Area near Laverne, Tennessee, discovered the body of an adult man wrapped in a blanket. The scene was a quiet corner of the boat ramp and campsite area just south of Nashville. The man had been shot several times, and his body had been set on fire. Decades would pass before anyone learned his name. For over 47 years, he was known only as the Rutherford County John Doe, filed under NamUs record UP 1585. From the start, the case presented challenges. The homicide had likely occurred just hours before discovery. The killer or killers had wrapped the body in a blanket, transported it to the recreation area, and attempted to destroy evidence by setting it alight. Despite the fire, one of the victim's hands remained intact enough for fingerprinting. Medical examiners noted partial dentures, a chest scar suggestive of prior heart surgery, and a large mole about 2 inches above the waistline, details that were carefully recorded. Even with these identifiers, no matches were found in missing person reports or fingerprint databases. Autopsy revealed that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds. The number of wounds is disputed in public reporting. Some sources describe 4, others 5, including injuries to the face, jaw, chest, shoulder, and ear. The victim's remains were severely burned, a fact that complicated identification and suggested a deliberate attempt to hide evidence. As years turned into decades, the case moved from the hands of detectives to cold case specialists. Detective Sergeant Richard Brinkley of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office led the renewed effort, following in the footsteps of prior investigators like Detective Steve Kohler and Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent Tom Carmouche. In 2018, forensic artists published a facial reconstruction sketch, hoping to generate leads. It brought renewed attention, but did not produce a positive identification. Throughout the 2010s, the Sheriff's Office submitted DNA evidence to various public and private labs. Initial efforts yielded no matches in the combined DNA index system. It was only with the advances of forensic-grade genome sequencing and investigative genetic genealogy that the mystery began to unravel. In 2020, the remains were sent to Othram, a laboratory specializing in advanced DNA analysis. Othram generated a complete genetic profile and worked with genealogists to construct possible family trees. By October 1, 2025, Othram notified the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office of a breakthrough. They had identified the victim as Jesse Lee Williamson. Born in 1926, Williamson was 52 years old at the time of his death. His family recalled that he had served in the United States Navy and lived in Alabama with relatives in North Carolina. Over the years, they had lost contact, never knowing what happened to him. The key to the identification was a DNA sample from an elderly niece living in North Carolina, the only close relative investigators could find. The match was confirmed, and the announcement was made public on October 6, 2025. After nearly 5 decades, the Rutherford County John Doe had a name: Jesse Lee Williamson. Despite this major breakthrough, no suspect has been named. The case remains an active homicide investigation. Authorities believe Williamson was shot elsewhere, then transported, wrapped, and burned at the Pool Knobs recreation area in an effort to conceal the crime. No motive has been established, and the origin scene is still unknown. The investigation stands as an example of perseverance and the power of scientific progress. Evidence was preserved through multiple generations of law enforcement and tested with every new advance in forensic technology. There have been no reports of procedural irregularities, and the long chain of custody reflects careful stewardship of this cold case. Today, detectives continue to seek leads. With the victim's identity restored, investigators hope that someone who knew Jesse Lee Williamson, or who recalls details from that summer in 1978, will come forward. The case is a reminder. Even decades later, the truth can still find its way to the surface. Michael Wayne Mest. On a quiet stretch of riverbank in Camp Verde, Arizona, in May of 2015, the remains of an unknown man were found beneath a tree by the Verde River. It was a discovery that posed more questions than it answered. The site, remote, shielded by cottonwoods and willows, gave little away. There was no wallet, no phone, just the remains, clad in jeans with a 36-inch waist, an alligator print belt, and Morel size 13 hiking boots. Authorities carefully processed the scene, entered the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons systems, and circulated a facial sketch. But no one stepped forward. For years, the Yavapai County John Doe 2015 remained nameless. The investigation began with standard approaches. Detectives and the medical examiner's team scoured missing persons reports across Arizona and the wider Southwest. They checked fingerprints, examined dental records, and appealed to the public with the sketch. Still, the case went cold. For nearly a decade, the man's identity eluded everyone, and the circumstances of his death remained undetermined. The autopsy could not confirm how or why he died. There were no signs of obvious trauma disclosed publicly, only the silence of an unsolved story on the banks of the Verde. Yet the case was never forgotten. As DNA technology evolved, the Yavapai County Office of the Medical Examiner preserved the evidence, waiting for the moment when a new breakthrough might be possible. That moment came in 2023, when the remains were submitted to Othram, a Texas-based laboratory specializing in forensic-grade genome sequencing and investigative genetic genealogy. The lab succeeded where older techniques had failed, extracting a full genetic profile from the skeletal remains. Using advanced genealogy, Othram's analysts constructed possible family trees, searching for living relatives who might solve the mystery. Meanwhile, back in the records of a South Carolina coroner's office, there was a preserved blood card, collected in 2020 from a man killed in a hit-and-run accident. That man, it turned out, was the brother of the John Doe from Arizona. Through rapid kinship testing, the genetic link was confirmed. The man found in Camp Verde was Michael Wayne Mest, born August 9, 1964, in Kentucky. He had lived much of his life in Tucson, Arizona, and was documented to have spent time in Camp Verde in 2010 and 2012. The announcement came on July 28, 2025. After a decade, Michael Mest's name was restored. He was about 50 years old at the time of his death, not 55 as some brief blurbs mistakenly reported. Mest's story, though finally given a name, remains incomplete. Authorities have not publicly determined his cause or manner of death. The clothing and boots hint at a life spent outdoors, possibly transient in those later years. But whether his death was due to accident, exposure, or foul play is still open to speculation. The case highlights both the advances and the limitations of forensic science. Traditional approaches, fingerprinting, facial sketches, missing persons checks, proved invaluable for preservation, but it was genome-scale sequencing and genealogical research that ultimately closed the gap. The chain of custody held strong. Evidence was maintained and re-examined as technology progressed. There were no procedural lapses, no controversy, only steady, quiet persistence. Some lesser-known aspects of Michael Mest's story stand out. His belt's alligator print, the Morel hiking boots, and the years spent unclaimed on a sketchboard. Each detail is a piece of a larger, unfinished puzzle. Mest's verified presence in Camp Verde just a few years before his death brackets a period of movement and perhaps hardship. In the end, it was the blood of a brother, preserved across state lines, that provided the connection his life's end could not. For now, the questions surrounding Michael Mest's final days remain. The Yavapai County Medical Examiner and investigators continue to seek answers. Not just how he died, but how a man once known to family and friends could vanish so completely, only to return through the careful work of science and kin. In giving back his name, they've given a measure of closure. But the story, like the riverbank where he was found, still keeps its secrets. Aaron Callahan. On August 16, 2022, a quiet corner of Knoxville's 4th and Gill neighborhood became the unlikely center of a mystery. In a wooded lot near East 4th Avenue and 3rd Avenue, investigators found the remains of a woman, unidentified, without ID, and without any clear answers as to how she had come to rest there. What followed was a long, patient effort by the Knoxville Police Department and the Knox County Regional Forensic Center, an effort that would stretch nearly 3 years and ultimately rely on the newest frontiers of forensic science to bring back a name: Aaron Callahan. At the scene, investigators documented everything with care. The decedent was a white female, estimated 4'10" to 5'5" with blonde hair. She was dressed in a black tank top, black leggings, and a black Carhartt logo hat. There were no immediate clues, no driver's license, no phone, and no personal effects that would unlock her story. With little to go on, the Forensic Center's anthropologists provided age and height estimates, spanning 33 to 55 years old. But these broad bands, while narrowing the search, couldn't provide certainty. In the weeks that followed, the team compared the woman's dental and radiographic records to those from local missing persons files. They checked half a dozen cases, each time coming up empty. A facial composite was developed and released to the public on October 4, 2024, with a plea for tips and information, but the woman's identity continued to elude investigators. The case became another Jane Doe, a quiet question mark in a community that didn't forget. Yet the mystery of the wooded lot was never shelved. In March 2023, the Knox County RFC partnered with Othram, a Texas-based laboratory specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. Using advanced genome sequencing, the team developed a detailed DNA profile from the remains. Analysts at Othram searched genealogical databases and built potential family trees. It's a painstaking, collaborative process. Part detective work, part science, part hope. Meanwhile, public records and NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, became crucial research tools. Slowly, the details of the unknown woman's life began to emerge. The breakthrough finally came in March 2025. After nearly 3 years, the laboratory and forensic teams could confirm her identity. She was Aaron C. Callahan, last seen in Knoxville on June 1, 2022, age 47, not the younger or older ages sometimes speculated in online forums. The announcement was made public on March 31st and April 1st, 2025. Aaron Callahan's name returned to her, closing the Jane Doe file but leaving many questions unresolved. The cause and manner of her death were not released by authorities. No suspect has been named, and investigators have emphasized the focus on restoring her identity, not yet on prosecution. The wooded area where she was found has kept its secrets. Was it the scene of a crime, or the site where she was left after death? The investigation remains open. Several lesser-known details are worth noting. The exact discovery spot, described precisely as the wooded area near East 4th and 3rd in 4th and Gill, was more specific than many headlines indicated. The black Carhartt hat and clothing became focal points in appeals. The RFC's partnership with Othram began in March 2023, giving a concrete start point for the DNA phase. This was also the 21st case in Tennessee resolved with Othram technology, a sign of how genetic genealogy is changing the landscape of cold case investigation. What can be said for certain is that this was a team effort. Knoxville Police, the Forensic Center, Othram, and the community all played their parts. There were no reported missteps or controversies, only the slow, determined application of new tools to an old problem. For now, Erin Callahan's story, her life, her last days, and her death, remains incomplete. But her name, at least, is no longer lost. And for the people of Knoxville, that matters. In the shade of those woods, the quiet mystery is a little less silent. Kimberly Ann Robertson. In October 2022, deep in the woods just north of the Camp Shelby Joint Forces Training Center in Forest County, Mississippi, a conservation officer following up on a suspected game violation stumbled onto something far more grave: skeletal human remains scattered among the leaf litter. There was no ID, no wallet, just bones, a couple of rings, and silence beneath the trees. The case would be logged as Forest County Jane Doe, and for a while the mystery seemed destined to linger unsolved, another cold trace on the map of missing people. As autumn faded into winter, the search for answers intensified. In December 2022, a follow-up recovery operation brought together the Forest County Sheriff's Office, Camp Shelby staff, the county coroner, and faculty and students from the University of Southern Mississippi's Anthropology Department. They combed the woods again, this time with the help of a cadaver dog named Rambo from DNA K9. More remains were found, slowly piecing together a fuller profile of the woman who had died out here. Among the items collected were 2 rings, a solid silver band, and a diamond ring with stones later verified by a jeweler as genuine and likely vintage. These small but personal details suggested a life with history, possessions once cherished, now silent witnesses in the soil. But as 2023 dawned, the woman's name, her story, and the manner of her death remained unknown. The usual forensic avenues had been exhausted. No local missing persons matched the profile. A white woman, estimated 5'5" to 5'9", under 60 years old, likely dead for months or longer. The cause and manner of death could not be conclusively established from the bones alone, and there were no immediate signs pointing to homicide, accident, or natural causes. Without identification, the case risked going cold. But the search did not stop. With dedicated funding from Mississippi philanthropist Carla Davis, the Forest County Sheriff's Office and the Mississippi State Medical Examiner submitted the skeletal remains to Othram, a Texas lab at the leading edge of forensic genetic genealogy. Othram's forensic-grade genome sequencing built a DNA profile robust enough to search genealogical databases and trace family lines. Months of work, both in the lab and among caseworkers, followed. Kinship analysis pointed to genetic relatives, and in early 2024, a breakthrough. The remains were conclusively identified as belonging to Kimberly Ann Robertson, also known as Kimberly Ann Hall in some reports, a nurse from State Line, Mississippi, born January 12, 1974. Her identity was publicly announced on February 16, 2024. Little is known about Kimberly's final months. Official sources have not disclosed a timeline of her last movements or contacts, and the circumstances of her death remain publicly unspecified. The wooded tract where she was found is not far from busy roads and Camp Shelby's boundary, yet is isolated, enough for months to pass before discovery. Whether she came here herself or was brought thus is unclear. No suspects have been named. No foul play has been confirmed or ruled out. The investigation is ongoing. A few details stand out, rarely captured in headline reporting. The scene was discovered as conservation officers responded to a possible game violation, not during routine patrol. The rings, a diamond band, vintage and real, and a plain silver ring, remained close by after months or years exposed. The search for her remains involved a unique mix of local law enforcement, academic anthropology, and a working cadaver dog. And without Carla Davis's philanthropic gift, the DNA breakthrough that restored Kimberly's name may have taken years longer, or never happened at all. Today, Kimberly Ann Robertson's case remains open, her loved ones waiting for answers about her fate. But thanks to new science, old-fashioned persistence, and a community unwilling to let her be forgotten, she is no longer Jane Doe. She has her name back. And sometimes, for those lost and found in the woods, that is where justice and remembrance begin. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video